The night the storm came, no one expected to find her. No one expected her to be alive, and no one, least of all the man who pulled her from the sea, could have known that saving her life would set in motion the unraveling of the most powerful conspiracy Greyhaven had ever seen. The Atlantic off the coast of Greyhaven, Maine, did not forgive mistakes. On the best of nights, the water was cold and unrelenting. On the worst, it became something else entirely, a living, breathing force that swallowed boats whole and returned nothing. The fishermen of Greyhaven knew this. They had grown up with it. They had buried fathers and uncles because of it. And they had learned, over generations, to read the sky the way other men read books. Ethan Cole read it wrong that night. He had left the dock at 10:30, long after the other boats had gone in. The radio had crackled with warnings before he lost reception near the outer shoals, but he had ignored them. He needed the money. He always needed the money. His son Noah had a field trip coming up, $42, which seemed like nothing to most people and everything to Ethan. His engine needed a new fuel line. The electric bill had been sitting on the kitchen counter for 3 weeks, with a red notice stamp across the top. So Ethan had taken his 23-foot wooden trawler, the one his father had left him, and pointed it east into the dark. The storm hit with no warning at all. One moment the sea was flat and black and quiet, and the next, swells were rising 6, 8, 10 feet around him, the trawler groaning and pitching on each one like it was trying to throw him overboard. Rain came sideways. Lightning strobed across the horizon. Ethan killed the outboard and fought to keep the bow into the waves, his hands raw on the wheel, salt water burning in his eyes. He thought, distantly, about Noah sleeping at home, under his blue blanket with the cartoon fish on it. He thought about how he had promised the boy he would be back before sunrise. He almost missed her entirely. He saw the shape first pale and formless in the trough between two swells, barely above the surface. His mind told him it was a buoy, or a cooler, or a plastic drum. Fishermen saw all kinds of debris in these waters. He almost steered past, almost, but something made him look twice. The shape moved, not with the waves against them. A hand, fighting uselessly against 300 miles of open ocean, one arm raised and dropped, with the mechanical desperation of someone who had not yet accepted they were dying. Ethan did not think. He cut the engine, grabbed the life ring off the stern rail, and went in. The water hit him like a fist. 47 degrees. His chest seized, and his vision went white at the edges. He forced himself to kick, to move, to pull toward that pale shape in the dark. He was not a young man anymore. His shoulders ached on clear days, and his right knee had been bad since a dock accident 3 years ago. But he swam. He reached her in under a minute. She was face up, barely. Her mouth was open, pulling in more water than air. Her hair was black and plastered flat across her face. She wore the remnants of what had once been a very expensive dress, silk or something like it now, torn at one shoulder and soaked through. Ethan looped the ring under her arms, got his own arm around her chest, and fought his way back to the trawler one brutal yard at a time. Getting her aboard took everything he had. He hauled her over the transom and onto the deck, and stood bent over, hands on his knees, shaking. She was not breathing well. He turned her on her side, and she coughed a terrible, retching sound, and expelled what seemed like a gallon of seawater. He stayed with her through 2 more coughing fits until her breathing steadied, ragged but present. The storm was still raging. He wrapped her in his own oilskin and got them both below. It was only then, in the dim orange light of the cabin, that he saw the bruises. They were on her left wrist and her upper arms dark. Deliberate marks that had not come from the sea. Her left hand was scraped raw across the knuckles, and there was a cut above her right ear that was still seeping. Ethan looked at those marks for a long time, saying nothing. He pointed the trawler back toward Greyhaven. When he pulled into the dock, it was close to 2 in the morning. He carried her to the truck. She weighed almost nothing, which frightened him, and drove the 3 miles to his house on the edge of the pines. The porch light was on. It was always on. He had never been able to break the habit. Even now, Noah heard the door. The boy appeared at the top of the stairs in his pajamas, squinting against the light, small and serious-faced, even half asleep. Ethan explained quickly, quietly. Noah did not ask unnecessary questions. He was 10 years old, and he had grown up in this house, and he understood, with the instinct of a child who has learned early what emergencies look like, exactly what was needed. Together they got her to the spare room. Noah brought towels and the extra blanket from the hall closet. Ethan found dry clothes, a flannel shirt, and a pair of sweatpants that had belonged to his wife and left them folded on the chair by the door. He cleaned the cut above her ear as carefully as he could and wrapped her wrist. Her breathing was steady now. Her color was coming back. Noah fell asleep in the armchair beside the door, his head tilted to one side. Ethan sat at the kitchen table and looked at his own hands, red and cracked and trembling slightly. He made coffee. He did not drink. He thought about calling someone. A doctor, the county sheriff's office, anyone, but something stopped him. He was not sure what. He went back to the spare room to check on her. He reached for her wet jacket, hung on the peg inside the door, meaning to drape it more carefully. It fell from his hands when he picked it up, not because of its weight, because of what fell out of the inside pocket. A compact 9mm handgun, small and matte black, landed on the hardwood floor, with a sound that seemed enormous in the silence of the house. Ethan stood very still. He looked at the gun on the floor. He looked at the woman asleep in the bed. He bent slowly, picked up the gun, and set it on the dresser across the room. He stood there for a long time. Then he walked back to the kitchen, sat down, and did not sleep at all. She woke up screaming. Not loudly, it was more of a sharp, involuntary sound. The kind that comes when someone snaps back into consciousness from a nightmare that felt entirely real. Ethan was at the door in 3 seconds flat. She was upright in the bed, both hands raised in front of her, eyes wide and wild, and scanning. He stopped in the doorway. He did not move toward her. "You're okay," he said. "Just that. Plain and even. You're in my house. I pulled you out of the water last night. You're safe." She stared at him. Her chest was heaving. Then, slowly, something in her face settled not into calm exactly, but into a controlled state. Like a person who had spent a long time teaching themselves not to show fear. "Where am I?" she asked. "Greyhaven. It's a town on the coast. Small. About 400 people." She looked around the room. The old oak dresser. The faded curtain with the blue stripe. The flannel shirt folded on the chair. She looked at her wrapped wrist. She looked at the window, where thin morning light was coming through. "I'm Ethan," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Sophia. Nothing else. No last name. No explanation of how she had ended up alone in the ocean, in a torn dress, in the middle of a nor'easter. Ethan did not ask. He told her breakfast would be ready when she was feeling up to it, and left her alone. Over the next 3 days, she revealed almost nothing. She said she had been on a boat that had encountered trouble in the storm. She said she did not need a hospital. She said her phone had been lost in the water, and she needed to borrow his when she felt stronger. Ethan listened to all of this, and nodded, and did not press. Noah had no such restraint, which turned out to be exactly the right approach. On the second morning, while Ethan was mending net on the back porch, Noah led Sophia on a tour of Greyhaven that covered the docks, the bait shop, the general store with the broken sign, and the stretch of rocky beach at the north end, where Ethan sometimes brought him after school. Sophia kept up without complaint, her hands in the pockets of a borrowed flannel, her eyes moving over everything with a sharpness that was at odds with the simplicity of what she was looking at. They ate dinner together that evening, pan-fried cod, and canned corn and biscuits from a box, which Noah explained was a special dinner because usually it was just soup. Sophia ate everything on her plate. She sat very straight at the table, which she seemed to do out of habit rather than stiffness. And she watched the two of them with an expression that Ethan could not quite name. It was after dinner, while he was washing up, that he noticed. Noah had snagged a loose button on his jacket, the good one, the one Ethan saved for when they went to church, or the school's parent nights. The boy stood in the kitchen looking at it with the specific misery of a child who knows he has done something wrong by accident. Ethan dried his hands, found the little sewing kit in the junk drawer, and sat down at the table to fix it. He did not make a fuss about it. He just threaded the needle and sewed the button back on, while Noah held his jacket and talked about something that had happened at recess. Sophia stood in the doorway and watched this for longer than she realized. She had grown up in houses full of expensive things and very little warmth. She knew what it looked like when people loved each other carefully, when they took the small damages of daily life seriously, when they repaired things instead of replacing them. She had not seen it in a long time. She excused herself before either of them noticed she was standing there. That night she borrowed Ethan's cell phone, an old model with a cracked screen, and went to the back of the house. She stood in the dark near the woodpile and dialed a number from memory. The call connected on the second ring. She spoke quietly but clearly. "It's me. Don't say my name. I'm somewhere safe. I need you to pull everything we have on the Hale Group, all of it, not just the public filings. And I need you to keep it quiet. If they know I'm alive, they'll finish this." She hung up and stood in the dark for a moment, listening to the wind off the water. Inside, through the thin walls of the house, she could hear Ethan coughing. It was a persistent, dry sound, the kind that settles into a man's chest when he's been out in cold air too many nights without proper rest. A moment later she heard the soft thud of a cabinet closing, and then the house went quiet. In the morning she looked in the medicine cabinet for aspirin and noticed the nearly empty bottle of cough medicine pushed to the back. She noticed, too, that there was a second, unopened bottle beside it. A child's formula with a cartoon bear on the label. Purchased, but not opened yet. She stood in the bathroom for a long moment, her hand on the shelf, saying nothing. Greyhaven was a town that had seen hard times before. The fishing industry had been declining for 2 decades. Smaller catches, higher fuel costs, regulations that the big commercial operators could absorb and the small independent fishermen could not. The cannery on the south end had closed 8 years ago. The hardware store had become a storage unit rental place. The population had been dropping steadily since Noah was born, but the people who were left loved the place with a fierceness that outsiders found difficult to understand. They had buried their parents here. They had built their houses on land their grandparents had cleared. The water was in the grain of who they were, which made what Hale Group was doing particularly devastating. The company had appeared in Greyhaven like a quiet flood. First, a few representatives at town hall meetings, well-dressed men with glossy pamphlets and practiced smiles, talking about revitalization and economic investment and waterfront development. Then the offers had started arriving in mailboxes. Then the town council had held a closed session that no one in the actual town had been invited to attend. And then the certified letters had gone out. The letters were polite. They were also non-negotiable. Hale Group intended to purchase the entire stretch of coastal property from Millbrook Road to the northern point, 47 properties, in total, for the purpose of constructing a luxury resort and marina complex. The offered purchase price per parcel was about 60% of assessed value. The letters thanked residents for their cooperation and provided a deadline for response. That deadline was 3 weeks away. Within those 3 weeks, the following things happened. 2 families who refused to respond found their water service interrupted for what the town utility office described as routine maintenance. A man named Roy Garrett, who had written an angry letter to the county newspaper, had his fishing license suspended over a paperwork discrepancy that he had never been notified of. The owner of the bait shop, a 61-year-old woman named Darlene, who had run the business for 30 years, received a visit from a county code inspector who cited 14 violations that had never been issues before. The town understood the message. Ethan attended the community meeting at the Greyhaven Grange on a Thursday night. Sophia sitting quietly in the back row in borrowed clothes, her hair pulled back, watching. The meeting was not what most people would have called productive. The mayor, a soft-handed man named Whitmore, who had held the office for 11 years, sat behind the table at the front of the room and explained, with practiced sympathy, that the town had very limited legal options. The Hale Group's offer was within legal bounds. The purchase process was voluntary. When Ethan stood up to speak, the room went quiet. He was not an angry man by nature. His voice was low and measured. He said that the land his family had farmed and fished for 4 generations was not for sale at any price. He said that his wife had wanted to be buried near the water she had loved, and her ashes were interred near the bluff at the northern edge of the coal property. He said that what was being done to Greyhaven was not development, it was erasure. Mayor Whitmore thanked him for his comments. Sophia, in the back row, watched the mayor's face while Ethan spoke. She watched the careful blankness of it, the practiced non-reaction, the slight tension around the eyes that other people might have missed. She did not miss it. She also did not miss the folder sitting open on the table in front of the mayor, half turned away from the audience. From her angle in the back row, she could see only the top corner of the document inside a letterhead, a logo, Hale Group. She recognized it immediately. The interlocked H and G, navy blue against white. She had seen it in her own company's files, referenced in a subsidiary acquisition deal that had struck her as unusual 6 weeks ago, right before everything had gone wrong. She sat very still for the rest of the meeting. When it was over, she walked out into the parking lot beside Ethan and Noah and said nothing for a long time. The night air smelled of pine and salt. Noah reached up and took her hand without thinking about it, and she let him, and the 3 of them walked to the truck in silence. They came looking for her on the 4th day. 2 black SUVs came slowly down the main street of Greyhaven at around noon, moving in the particular unhurried way of people who are not concerned about being noticed. They stopped at the hardware store, at the diner, at the dockmaster's office. The men who got out were large and wore the kind of casual clothes that were too clean and too coordinated to be accidental. They asked about a woman late 30s, dark hair, might have been injured. Said they were with an insurance company following up on a maritime incident. Ethan heard about it from Darlene at the bait shop, who had sent them on their way with misdirection that was technically not lying but was certainly not helpful. He found Sophia sitting on the back steps that afternoon, watching the tree line. Black SUVs, he said. He was not a man who softened things unnecessarily. She nodded. She did not seem surprised. Insurance company, he said. They're not an insurance company. A silence stretched between them. A gull called somewhere above the pines. You should probably leave, Ethan said, before they find you here. She looked at him. There was something in her expression that he had not seen before, not the controlled composure she usually wore, but something rawer than that, something that looked, very briefly, like the face of a person who was tired of being alone with whatever she was carrying. I know, she said. That night, after dinner, Noah helped with the dishes while Ethan read at the kitchen table. At some point, Noah wandered into the living room and came back. Is Sophia leaving? He asked. Ethan looked up from his book. Probably soon. Noah processed this. He dried a glass with careful thoroughness. Will you come back? He asked when Sophia came in from the back porch. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. The question, so simple, so direct, the way only children can manage, caught her in the chest like something physical. She looked at the boy, small and serious-eyed in his damp dish towel, and she did not answer right away. I don't know, she said finally. Noah seemed to accept this. He handed her a glass to dry. That night, she could not sleep. She found herself at the door of the kitchen at close to midnight, watching through the half-open doorway. Ethan was asleep at the table, not in a chair, but slumped forward with his head on his folded arms. Surrounded by a spread of papers, she could see what they were from the doorway. Bills. A bank statement. A letter with a red header that said final notice. An open ledger with numbers handwritten in careful columns. Some of them circled. He had fallen asleep over his accounts. She stood there a long time and did not go in. The helicopter came for her the next morning. It appeared over the tree line to the north at around 9 o'clock. A sleek private machine that had no business being in the airspace above a small Maine fishing town. It landed in the open field at the edge of the coal property. And 2 people climbed out, a man in a dark suit and a woman with a tablet and an earpiece. Ethan had been fixing a section of the dock when he heard it. He walked back to the house to find Sophia already dressed in clothes that had arrived the previous evening in a delivery that nobody had ordered but that she seemed to have expected. She was standing in the yard looking composed in a way that seemed to require some effort. She turned to face him. "I owe you more than I can say," she said. He looked at the helicopter. He looked at her. Something moved across his face that he did not put into words. "My name is Sophia Bennett," she said. Bennett Holdings. He recognized the name. Anyone who had been watching the business news recently would have. Bennett Holdings was one of the largest commercial real estate development companies on the eastern seaboard, publicly traded, with projects in 14 states. He said nothing for a moment. "The gun," he said. "I put it on the dresser." "I know. I found it. Thank you. Are you safe?" She looked at him steadily. "I will be." She walked to the helicopter and climbed in, and the door closed. Ethan stood in the field and watched it go. Then he went back to the dock and picked up his tools and went back to work. Within 2 weeks, his trawler was vandalized, its engine compartment flooded with diesel and seawater through a deliberately opened valve. The damage was not catastrophic, but it was enough to ground the boat for the better part of a month. The repair estimate was $4,000, which Ethan did not have. His bank, a regional lender that had been carrying his fishing operation loan for 3 years, sent a letter shortly afterward, notifying him that his line of credit had been called in early due to a review of his account. He had 60 days to repay the balance. The town code office sent a notice that his property required an updated structural survey before any transfer or modification of title could occur. The notice was backdated by 2 weeks, making his response deadline appear to be in the past. And then one evening Noah came home from school and did not talk at dinner. Ethan waited. After the dishes were done, Noah sat at the kitchen table and aligned his fork and spoon with mechanical precision. "They said we're going to lose the house," he said. Ethan sat down across from him. "Kids at school?" "Tommy Whitmore, the mayor's son. He said his dad told him that our property was going to be the main entrance to the new resort. He said you were in the way." Ethan was quiet. Noah looked up. "Is it true? We're not losing the house." Noah was 10 and smart, and had spent the last several years developing an extremely accurate internal detector for when his father was saying something he believed versus something he wanted to believe. He could tell the difference. He looked at his father's face for a long time. "Dad," he said, "if Mom were here, would she know how to save us?" The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a boat horn sounded once from the direction of the harbor, low and distant. Fading almost immediately, Ethan reached across the table and put his hand over his son's. "She'd know," he said. "She always knew." He stood up, kissed the top of Noah's head, and went onto the back porch. He stood there in the cold for a long time, his hands on the rail, looking at the dark line where the trees met the sky. He had not cried since his wife's funeral. He did not cry now. But his knuckles on the porch rail were white. He stood up the next morning at 4:30, the same as always, made coffee, packed his kit, and went to the dock. He was still standing. Sophia Bennett returned to New York to a board of directors that was worried. A PR team that had prepared 3 different versions of a press statement about her absence, and a personal assistant who had been fielding calls for 10 days while quietly, carefully, holding everything together. She returned to all of it and said very little. What she did instead was work. She had suspected for 6 weeks before the night in the ocean that something inside her company was badly wrong. A subsidiary acquisition that should have passed through routine legal review had instead been rerouted through a holding company she did not recognize, bearing a name she had only seen once before in connection with a municipal zoning dispute in coastal Maine. She had started pulling threads, and then she had been invited to a dinner meeting on a colleague's yacht, and she had accepted, and that had been the last mistake she made out of naivete. She had been pushed. She knew it before she hit the water. She knew who had been standing behind her. She knew, too, that when she swam or tried to swim in 40-degree water in the dark, with a bruised rib and a cut above her ear, she had expected to die. The fact that she had not was due entirely to a man with a 23-foot wooden trawler and a bad knee who had jumped in after her without thinking twice. She owed him something. More than that, she owed it to herself to finish what she had started. The files were dense and deliberately obscured, layered through shell companies in 3 states and 2 offshore jurisdictions. Money moving in circles specifically designed to resist casual scrutiny. But Sophia Bennett had not built one of the most successful real estate holding companies on the eastern seaboard by being a casual scrutinizer. She worked 18 hours a day for 10 days. She brought in 2 forensic accountants she trusted completely, and her longtime corporate attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Arliss, who had been practicing securities law for 30 years and had seen most things but raised an eyebrow at this. What they found was methodical and ugly. Victor Hale, founder and chairman of Hale Group, had been operating a long-running scheme of municipal corruption along the entire northern New England coast. The pattern was consistent: identify undervalued coastal land in economically distressed communities, establish informal agreements with local officials through a network of consulting payments and campaign contributions, engineer conditions that made voluntary sale preferable to the alternatives, and acquire properties at suppressed prices for development at luxury scale. The returns were extraordinary. The human cost was invisible in the financial documentation. The Greyhaven project was simply the latest iteration. But there was more. Victor Hale had also, over the previous 18 months, been positioning to acquire a significant stake in Bennett Holdings itself, using a series of proxy investors and a coordinated short-selling campaign. Sophia's continued leadership was the only thing preventing a hostile restructuring. The night on the yacht had not been about silencing a rival. It had been about removing the one person who could expose the entire operation. Sophia found this section of the documentation on a Tuesday afternoon. She sat for a long time without moving. Then she found the property lists. The Greyhaven acquisition targets were itemized with cold efficiency parcel numbers, assessed values, acquisition costs, projected post-development values. Each parcel had a status note. Most said compliant or pending signature. A small number said non-compliant with follow-up actions listed: utility interruption, code enforcement referral, credit review. She scrolled to the C's. Coal property, Millbrook Road extension non-compliant. Active follow-up. Problem resident. Estimated resolution. Coercive pressure. Judicial enforcement, if necessary. Do not allow media contact. She stared at the words problem resident for a very long time. Then she opened a new folder on her computer and started building. She also found something else, almost at the end. A photograph, pulled from a surveillance capture, a meeting in a restaurant that someone had documented carefully. 2 men at a table, leaning together over what appeared to be documents. Victor Hale and Mayor Whitmore of Greyhaven. The date stamp on the photograph was 6 days before the first certified letters had arrived in Greyhaven mailboxes. The notice of physical enforcement arrived at the Cole property on a Wednesday. It was delivered by a county sheriff's deputy who had the look of a man performing a duty he did not feel good about. He would not meet Ethan's eyes when he handed him the envelope. The notice informed Ethan that the property had been subject to a lien filing due to outstanding municipal infractions, and that physical proceedings would begin in 5 business days to facilitate transfer of title to Hale Group Development LLC, in accordance with the settlement terms agreed to by the town of Greyhaven. Ethan had agreed to no settlement terms. He called the number on the notice and was told the matter had already been adjudicated. He called a legal aid clinic in the county seat and left a message that was not returned. He drove to the county courthouse and spoke to a clerk who gave him 3 forms to fill out and said the filing deadline had already passed. He drove home in silence. Noah was at school. The house was empty. Ethan stood in the kitchen and looked at the room, the counter where his wife used to stack her recipe books, the window above the sink where she had kept a small clay pot with herbs, the faded rectangle on the wall where a photograph had hung before the humidity warped the frame, and he had taken it down, meaning to replace it, and had not yet gotten around to it. He made coffee and sat down. On the 5th day, a Monday morning, they came. 3 county sheriff vehicles. A flatbed truck carrying a small yellow excavator. 3 men in Hale Group, logoed fleece vests. 2 representatives from the county code office. A woman with a clipboard who introduced herself as a title transfer coordinator. And, trailing behind them at a distance that was clearly deliberate, 2 local news cameras. Word had gotten out. Half the town was already there. People lined the edge of the property. Roy Garrett, with his hands in his fists, Darlene with her arms crossed, a dozen others who had already signed their own papers because they had no other choice but who had come out anyway, because there are things that people show up for even when there is nothing they can do. The title transfer coordinator approached Ethan with the clipboard. "Mr. Cole, we're here to complete the transfer process. If you'll just sign at the bottom of the highlighted sections, we can make this as straightforward as possible for everyone." He looked at the papers. He looked at the people behind her, the deputy standing with his thumbs in his belt, the Hale Group representatives exchanging quiet words, the mayor's aide watching from a discreet distance. He looked at his son, standing just behind him, small and still and white-faced. He looked at the papers again. He held out his hand for the pen. Noah made a sound that was very small and very final, not a cry, but the sound before a cry. Ethan held the pen. The title transfer coordinator was already reaching forward to position the clipboard. The cameras were steady. The morning was bright and cold and flat. Ethan put the pen to the paper, and then the sound came. Tires. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, the growl of heavy engines and then the shriek of brakes on gravel. And then 4 black SUVs came through the gate of the Cole property in rapid succession, fanning out and stopping in a line about 30 feet away. For one very long second, nobody moved. Then the door of the lead vehicle opened. She was dressed for war. Sophia Bennett stepped out of the vehicle in a charcoal suit that had been pressed to geometric precision, her dark hair pulled back, her expression exactly as composed as it had been in Ethan's kitchen the morning the helicopter came, except now the composure was pointed. It had a target. Behind her came Margaret Arliss, the attorney, carrying a document case. Behind her came 2 men in dark suits, who were quite clearly federal agents of some variety. Behind them came a woman with a video camera, who was very clearly not with any of the other groups. The title transfer coordinator took one step back, instinctively. Victor Hale's representatives went very still. Sophia looked past all of them. She looked at Ethan, who was standing with a pen in his hand and papers on a clipboard, and she shook her head once, a small, clear motion. He lowered the pen. Then she turned to face the room in general. And her voice, when she spoke, was not raised but carried in the cold morning air like it was amplified. "My name is Sophia Bennett, CEO of Bennett Holdings. I have filed, as of this morning, a civil complaint in federal district court alleging conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and attempted murder against Victor Hale, Hale Group Development LLC, Mayor Christopher Whitmore of Greyhaven, Maine, and 4 other named defendants. I have delivered copies of all supporting documentation to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the Maine Attorney General's office, and 3 major news organizations." Victor Hale was standing at the edge of the group near the flatbed truck. He had gone the color of old chalk. The documentation includes financial records showing the systematic bribery of municipal officials in 11 coastal communities over 9 years, the coercive suppression of residential property values through deliberate utility and regulatory abuse, the fraudulent conveyance of public land use agreements to private entities, and evidence of a premeditated assault on my person on the evening of the 14th, carried out under the direction of Victor Hale, with the intent to prevent this information from becoming public. She paused. Margaret Arliss opened the document case and began distributing copies with the calm efficiency of someone who has done this before and knows exactly what happens next. Victor Hale found his voice. These are unsubstantiated. The accounts are documented, Sophia said. The payments are traced. The communications are on record. She looked at him directly. And the fisherman you've been calling a problem resident, the man you labeled worthless in your internal documents, is the only genuinely honest man in this town. The federal agents were moving. Victor Hale took one step backward and then stopped, because there was nowhere to go. Mayor Whitmore, still standing near the road, turned and walked very quickly toward his car. But the second pair of federal agents had anticipated this and were already there. The exchange that followed was brief and not dignified. The title transfer coordinator set down her clipboard on the hood of the county vehicle and walked away. The camera crews were rolling. Ethan stood very still through all of it. He was still holding the pen. At some point, Noah moved to stand beside him, and Ethan's hand came down to rest on the boy's shoulder. Neither of them spoke. When the handcuffs were on and Victor Hale had been guided into the back of a federal vehicle, Sophia crossed the yard to where Ethan stood. She looked at him for a moment. "I'm sorry it took this long," she said. "You got here," he said. Noah looked up at both of them. He said nothing, which was unusual for him, but he reached over and tugged once on Sophia's sleeve, and she looked down, and he gave a single nod. The very particular nod of a 10-year-old boy who has decided something important and is registering it formally. She nodded back. The federal case moved quickly. As these things went, when the documentation was thorough, Victor Hale was indicted on 17 counts covering conspiracy, bribery, fraud, and 1 count of criminal solicitation relating to the incident on the yacht. Mayor Whitmore and 2 members of the town council resigned within the week and faced their own separate proceedings. 4 Hale Group executives entered into cooperation agreements. The coastal development projects in 11 communities, including Greyhaven, were frozen pending review of all associated land transactions. 47 families in Greyhaven received formal notification that the property transfer process initiated by Hale Group had been invalidated and that all associated liens and code enforcement actions had been rescinded. Roy Garrett's fishing license was reinstated. Darlene's code violations were dismissed. The family, whose water had been shut off, received a formal apology from the County Utility Authority, which, given the circumstances, they accepted with more grace than was strictly necessary. Ethan's bank loan was restructured under a federal small business protection program connected to the fraud investigation. His trawler was repaired at no cost to him. The state paid for it as part of a broader restitution framework, and he was back on the water within 3 weeks of the morning in the yard. He returned to his same schedule. Early mornings, cold coffee, the long quiet of the open water. He was not a man who adjusted easily to being talked about. And he was talked about a great deal in Greyhaven for a while. The local paper ran a piece about him. A larger paper picked it up. He declined 3 interview requests with the same polite brevity and went back to his nets. Noah handled the attention better. He gave 1 interview to the school newspaper, a single paragraph, characteristically direct, in which he said that his dad had always told him you help people because it's the right thing to do, not because of what you get for it. The interview was reprinted in 2 state newspapers, which Noah thought was funny and his father thought was a little much. Sophia Bennett returned to New York and to the complicated work of untangling everything that the investigation had surfaced. She also did something else. She established the Greyhaven Coastal Community Fund, a private endowment of significant size, structured to provide low-interest loan access and technical assistance to independent fishermen and small coastal businesses in economically distressed communities along the northern New England coast. The initial focus was Greyhaven itself. The bait shop, the boat repair outfit that had been on the verge of closing, the cooperative that the remaining fishermen were trying to organize. She also arranged for the town's crumbling dock infrastructure, which had been deteriorating for years, without the budget to address it, to receive a renovation grant that did not require the town to accept any private development conditions. The new dock pilings went in that fall. Ethan helped with the work. She came back to Greyhaven in late October. She came alone, no aide, no assistant, no vehicle beyond a rental car she had driven herself up from Portland. She wore jeans and a heavy sweater and boots that were practical rather than expensive. She drove down the main street and parked in front of the general store. And Darlene, who saw everything, noticed her immediately and said nothing to anyone for 45 minutes, which was approximately 44 minutes longer than usual for Darlene. She walked first to the northern bluff. The coal property extended to the edge of the bluff, where a rough wooden bench had been installed years ago facing the water. There was a small marker near the bench, a flat stone with a name carved in it. Ellen Cole. Below the name, a line that Ethan had carved himself. She loved this water, and it loved her back. Sophia stood there for a long time with the wind coming off the Atlantic. She thought about a man who had jumped into 40-degree water in the middle of a storm for a stranger. She thought about what it said about a person, not their courage, exactly, because courage is too simple a word for it, but their fundamental orientation toward other people. The assumption, so ingrained it required no deliberation, that someone in the water was worth going in after. She thought about the bills on the kitchen table, the child's cough medicine, the button sewn back on with the sewing kit from the junk drawer. She thought, he never stopped loving her. That's why he knows how to love people honestly. Not the people he's supposed to love, or the people who are convenient to love. Just people, as a practice, as a way of being. She stood at the bluff until the light started to go golden, and the water below turned the color of hammered copper. Then she walked back down the hill to the coal house. Greyhaven woke up slowly that fall, the way a place does when it has been holding its breath for a long time, and finally remembers how to exhale. The dock renovation brought contractors and work crews, and the particular energy of people building something. The bait shop stayed open. Two young couples who had moved away 2 years ago, citing the economic uncertainty, quietly came back and reopened a boat charter business that had been shuttered. A small seafood restaurant that had been running on reduced hours returned to full service. There was noise again at the harbor. On weekend mornings, the sound of engines turning over, of boats pulling out into the chop, of people calling to each other across the water. It was not a transformation, it was a return. Which is a different thing. Ethan noticed all of it, without saying much about it. He was constitutionally unsuited to optimism as a public position, but on mornings when the water was flat and the light was good, he stayed out a little longer than strictly necessary. And he came back to the dock in a state that, in another man, might have been called happy. Noah turned 11 in November and had a birthday party for the first time in several years. 6 friends from school, a chocolate cake from the bakery in the next town, and a persistent argument about a board game that lasted until nearly 9 o'clock and was never fully resolved. Ethan sat at the kitchen table through all of it, with a cup of coffee going cold and a book open and unread. And every so often he looked up at the noise and the mess and the complete ordinary chaos of it, and his expression was something that he would not have been able to name precisely, but that those who knew him recognized immediately. He was content. Sophia came to the door on a Saturday evening in late October, just as the last of the light was leaving the sky. She knocked, which Ethan thought was interesting, given that she had lived in this house for 4 days and never knocked once. The door opened, and Noah looked up at her. He was in his school sweatshirt, with a marker cap hanging off his nose from some project that was apparently underway on the kitchen table. He regarded her with the calm assessment he applied to most things. "You came back," he said. "I did." He considered her. The marker cap fell off his nose. He did not seem to notice. "Are you staying for dinner?" he asked. Then, with the particular gravity of someone asking a question that means more than its words, "Or forever?" Sophia Bennett, who had negotiated commercial real estate deals in 7 cities, who had faced down a boardroom of hostile executives without blinking, who had spent the better part of a month quietly dismantling the largest municipal corruption scheme in New England in 30 years. Sophia Bennett laughed. It was not a polished or composed sound. It was sudden and full and slightly wet at the edges, because her eyes had filled with something she was not expecting. And she was laughing before she could stop herself. Noah watched this with mild interest. "Dinner," she said, when she had recovered enough to speak. "For now." "Dinner." He nodded, satisfied, and stepped back from the door. Ethan was at the kitchen counter when she came in. He turned and looked at her, the same look he had given her across the field the morning the helicopter came. The morning she had told him her name, quiet and direct. No performance. "Sophia," he said. "Ethan," she said. Noah had already returned to his project and was narrating it to no one in particular, explaining in detailed and not entirely sequential terms why the thing he was building would work despite structural concerns that were, in his opinion, overstated. Ethan set an extra plate on the counter. They ate together. Later, long after Noah had gone to bed and the dishes were done, and the house had gone quiet in its particular way, the settling of old wood, the distant sound of water, the two of them stood at the window that faced the north. The sky was clear and very dark, and the stars over the Atlantic were bright, in a way they only are far from city light. The water was out there, vast and indifferent and old, moving in the dark as it always had and always would. It had taken his wife from him. In a way, the illness that took her had come on a winter like any other. Sudden and total, leaving him with a child and a boat and a piece of land on a coast that was trying to forget him. And it had nearly taken Sophia, on a night when the storm and the men behind it had seemed perfectly designed to make her disappear without a trace. Instead, she was here. He did not say any of this. He was not a man who said things like that, but she stood beside him at the window, and they both looked out at the water, and neither of them felt any need to fill the silence, because the silence was not empty. The sea that had almost taken everything had given something back, and Greyhaven, on the edge of that cold and indifferent water, was still standing. So were they.